The first words out of my daughter's mouth after I told her I was getting married again were not congratulations. Emily set down her wine glass, looked straight at me, and said, "Remarrying at 66? Dad, that's embarrassing." Her husband, Brandon, suddenly became very interested in cutting a steak. Emily leaned closer across the table. "Marry her and you'll lose me, and the kids." For a second, I thought I had misunderstood her. The restaurant was crowded, and a waiter had just dropped a tray somewhere behind me. Silverware clattered against the floor, followed by scattered applause from the bar. "What did you say?" I asked. "You heard me." We were sitting at a polished walnut table inside an expensive little bistro in downtown Indianapolis, the kind of place where the portions were small and the servers explained the butter. Emily had chosen it because she said we needed somewhere appropriate for a family announcement. I had assumed she meant my announcement. Apparently she meant hers. My name is David Harrison. I was 66 years old, retired after 37 years in UPS operations, and until that evening, I had believed I understood my only child. Emily was 14 when her mother died. Susan had ovarian cancer. By the time the doctors found it, there wasn't much they could do except buy us months and teach us how to pretend those months were enough. The night Susan died, Emily sat beside me in a hospital family room with her knees pulled to her chest. She was still wearing the Carmel Middle School sweatshirt she had slept in for 3 nights. I put my arm around her, and she pressed her face against my shirt. "It's just us now, Dad," she whispered. I promised I would take care of her. And I did. I learned how to fix a ponytail that did not lean sideways. I packed turkey sandwiches without mustard because she hated mustard that year. I stood outside dressing rooms holding jeans she had rejected and pretending I wasn't uncomfortable. When she got her driver's license, I spent 6 months sleeping lightly because every late-night car door made me sit up in bed. I worked early shifts when she had volleyball games in the afternoon. I worked late shifts when tuition bills came due. I missed vacations, postponed home repairs, and told myself I would date again when Emily was older. Then she went to Indiana University. Then she got married. Then the grandchildren came. There was always another reason to wait. I did not regret raising my daughter, not for 1 minute, but somewhere along the way, waiting became my entire life. Then I met Margaret Ellis. It happened 2 years earlier at a church book donation in Carmel. I was carrying boxes into the fellowship hall when one split open and dumped about 30 paperback mysteries across the floor. Margaret crouched beside me and picked up a worn copy of a James Patterson novel. "Well," she said, "at least nobody was murdered in the parking lot." I looked at her over the top of my reading glasses. "That we know of." She laughed, not politely. She really laughed. Margaret was 63, a retired elementary school principal from Noblesville. Her husband had died 6 years earlier. She wore comfortable shoes, drank her coffee black, and had a habit of answering questions honestly, even when honesty made things awkward. We started with coffee after volunteering, then Sunday dinner at Cracker Barrel. She always ordered grilled chicken and stole half my biscuits, despite claiming she did not want any. Eventually, we began walking around Eagle Creek Reservoir on Saturday mornings. I had arthritis in my left knee, and Margaret never rushed me. She simply slowed down and kept talking. Being with her did not feel like replacing Susan. It felt like breathing without asking permission. 3 weeks before the dinner with Emily, I proposed in Margaret's kitchen while she was scraping burnt cheese off a casserole dish. I had planned something better. I had even made a reservation at a restaurant near Meridian Hills. But she was standing there with yellow rubber gloves on, complaining about whoever invented baked ziti, and suddenly I could not imagine waiting another day. "Margaret," I said, "how would you feel about burning casseroles with me permanently?" She turned around and stared at me. "That may be the least romantic proposal in Indiana." "Is that a no?" She pulled off one glove. "No," she said softly, "it's a yes." For the first time in years, I felt excited about the future instead of merely prepared for it. That feeling lasted until Emily's ultimatum. I looked across the table at my daughter. "Margaret has never asked me for money," I said. "She has her own pension, her own house, and more common sense than both of us put together." "That's not the point." "What is the point?" Emily glanced toward the next table, lowering her voice. "The point is that people your age get taken advantage of." I sat back. People my age? You know what I mean. No, I don't think I do. Brandon finally cleared his throat. I'm sure Emily's just worried about protecting you. He said it gently, but his eyes stayed on his plate. Emily reached for my hand. I almost let her take it. Dad, Mom helped build everything you have. The house, your savings, all of it. How do you think it looks to bring another woman into her home? Susan has been gone 24 years. Emily pulled her hand back as if I had insulted her. So that makes her replaceable? No, it means I'm still alive. The words came out more sharply than I intended. For a moment, no one spoke. A server placed a basket of bread on our table and sensed enough tension to leave without explaining it. Emily folded her arms. If you go through with this, we won't be at the wedding. That's your decision. And you won't see Noah and Sophie. That one landed differently. Noah was 9, Sophie was 6. I picked them up from school every Wednesday. Noah liked to sit beside me in the garage while I changed the oil in my pickup. Sophie believed every meal improved if you added shredded cheese. You keep my grandchildren from me because I'm getting married? I'm asking you to choose your family. Margaret would be my family too. Emily's face hardened. And I guess you've chosen. I looked at Brandon. He gave me a small, helpless shrug, as though he were watching bad weather and had no authority over it. I paid my portion of the check and left. The February air outside was cold enough to sting my eyes. I sat in my Ford pickup in the parking garage with both hands resting on the steering wheel. My first instinct was to call Emily and apologize. That was what I had done for years. Whenever she was angry, I found a way to make peace, even when peace required me to surrender something. I took out my phone. There was already a message waiting. Marry her and don't expect us at the wedding. Or the kids. Choose carefully. I typed, I'm sorry, let's talk tomorrow. Then I stared at the words. A memory came back to me. Not of Susan's illness or Emily as a frightened girl, but of something smaller. Emily was 7, standing in our kitchen after throwing a tantrum because I would not let her skip school. Susan had waited until Emily went upstairs before speaking. You know you're allowed to let her be mad at you, she said. At the time, I laughed. Sitting in that parking garage nearly 30 years later, I finally understood what she meant. I erased the apology. Then I put the phone face down on the passenger seat and drove home without answering my daughter. For the first time in 24 years, I let her be angry. I expected to wake up the next morning feeling certain. Instead, I felt guilty. Not because I thought Emily was right, but because she'd managed to make me question something I'd been looking forward to for 2 years. That's what guilt does after enough years. It doesn't ask permission. It just walks into the room and sits down beside you. Saturday mornings had become my favorite part of the week. Margaret and I usually met around 8 at Eagle Creek Park. She always arrived 5 minutes early with 2 paper cups of coffee and a bag of mixed nuts she insisted was healthier than the donuts I kept trying to buy. That morning, I almost called to cancel. Instead, I drove there anyway. She spotted me crossing the parking lot and immediately knew something was wrong. You forgot the coffee, she said. I forgot a lot more than that. We started walking along the reservoir. February had stripped most of the trees bare, but the water was calm, reflecting a pale gray sky. A pair of geese drifted quietly near the shoreline. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Finally, Margaret broke the silence. How bad was dinner? I let out a long breath. Worse than I imagined. I told her everything. Emily's words. The threat about the grandchildren. The look on Brandon's face. The text message waiting when I reached my truck. Margaret listened without interrupting once. When I finished, she nodded slowly. So? If you decide not to marry me, I looked over at her. She smiled sadly. I'll survive. Margaret, no, let me finish. She stopped walking and faced me. I love you because you're a good man. I don't want that goodness to become another reason you suffer. She reached for my hand. If choosing Emily is what lets you sleep at night, then choose Emily. I stared at her. Most people, when they're afraid of losing someone, fight harder. Margaret was willing to let me go if she believed it would spare me pain. That simple act hurt more than Emily's ultimatum ever could. I don't want to lose you. You may not have to. She squeezed my hand gently. But whatever happens, don't make your decision out of fear. Those words stayed with me all weekend. Monday afternoon, someone knocked on my front door. When I opened it, Grace Miller stood there carrying a small blue storage box. Grace had been Susan's closest friend since college. The two of them taught Sunday school together, vacationed together, finished each other's sentences. After Susan died, Grace never tried to replace her. She simply made sure Emily and I never spent a holiday alone. "I found something while cleaning my attic," she said. Inside the box were old photographs, Christmas ornaments, Emily's second-grade art project, Susan's recipe cards. Near the bottom sat a sealed envelope. My name was written across the front in Susan's handwriting. Grace looked almost embarrassed. "I forgot this existed." "You've had it all these years?" She nodded. "I wasn't supposed to give it to you unless—" She hesitated. "Unless what?" She handed me the envelope. Susan had written one sentence beneath my name. Asterisk, asterisk. "Only if David ever believes loving again means betraying me, asterisk, asterisk." I couldn't speak. Grace touched my shoulder. She made me promise. "When?" "The week before hospice." We sat at my kitchen table while I opened the envelope with shaking fingers. Inside was only one sheet of paper. "David, if you're reading this, then I'm guessing you're doing exactly what I always worried you'd do. Feeling guilty for still being alive. Please don't. You gave me a beautiful life. You gave Emily a wonderful father. That debt was paid long ago. Promise me something. Don't spend the rest of your years guarding my memory so tightly that there's no room left for your own happiness. If someone kind finds you, please don't send her away because of me. I already had my turn. Now it's yours. Love always. Susan." By the time I reached the last line, I couldn't see the page anymore. Grace quietly handed me a tissue. "I almost forgot that letter existed," she whispered. "I'm glad you didn't." She smiled through tears. So is Susan. After Grace left, I carried the letter out to the backyard. Susan had loved gardening. I still hadn't changed much. Her rose bushes lined the fence exactly where she'd planted them. The little stone bird bath still leaned slightly to one side because I'd never gotten around to fixing it. I sat on the old wooden bench and read the letter again. Then again. For 24 years, I'd believed staying alone somehow honored Susan. Maybe all I'd really been honoring was my own fear. The next few days brought an unexpected change. Emily started calling constantly. At first, I thought she'd cooled off. Instead, every conversation circled back to Margaret. "Dad, have you thought this through? Dad, people our age are talking. Dad, what if she's after the house?" She even stopped by unexpectedly one Wednesday afternoon carrying homemade chicken soup. Emily almost never cooked. While we ate, she looked around the living room. "So, have you thought about downsizing?" "What?" "This place is huge. I've lived here 29 years. You don't need all this space anymore." I laughed softly. "I manage. You could sell now while the market's still good." "Why would I?" Emily shrugged. "A nice retirement community would make life easier." The words sounded rehearsed, almost as if she'd had the conversation before. When she left, I noticed she'd forgotten a folder on the kitchen counter. I picked it up to take outside before she drove away. A glossy brochure slid onto the floor. Asterisk, asterisk, Maple Grove Senior Living asterisk, asterisk. Luxury Independent Retirement Community. I stared at it for several seconds. Maybe she'd brought it with good intentions. Maybe. But something about it didn't feel right. Thursday evening, my phone rang while I was watching a Pacers game. It was Emily. "Dad?" "Hi. I'll call you back." Before I could answer, the line went quiet. She hadn't hung up. I could still hear voices. Brandon's voice floated faintly through the speaker. "If he marries her, everything changes," Emily answered quietly. "I know. We have to protect what's Mom built." Then Brandon said something that made my stomach tighten. "We're already running out of time." The call disconnected. I sat motionless on the couch. Maybe Brandon wasn't talking about money. Maybe he meant something else entirely. But deep down, for the first time, I began wondering if my daughter wasn't simply afraid of losing me. Maybe she was afraid of losing something else. And if that was true, Then I had been fighting the wrong battle all along. I didn't sleep much after overhearing that phone call. Maybe Brandon had been talking about my health. Maybe he meant the wedding. Maybe I was imagining things because I was hurt. By Friday morning, I'd talked myself into 3 different explanations. Then I asked myself one simple question. If Susan were sitting across the breakfast table from me, what would she tell me to do? She'd tell me to stop guessing. She'd tell me to find out the truth. So instead of driving home after my annual physical, I turned onto Main Street in Carmel and parked outside Nathan Brooks's law office. Nathan and I had known each other for almost 30 years. He'd handled Susan's will, helped us refinance our mortgage, even coached Emily's soccer team one season when the regular coach broke his ankle. When I walked into his office, he smiled. "David Harrison, either you're finally making a will," he looked closer, "or something happened." I smiled weakly. "I need advice." 20 minutes later, he knew everything. Emily, Margaret, the ultimatum, the phone call, the retirement home brochure. Nathan leaned back in his chair without saying anything for several seconds. Finally, he asked, "What do you want?" "I want everybody protected." "That's different from asking how to punish somebody." "I don't want revenge." "I know." He folded his hands together. "Let's start there." For the next hour, he explained my options in plain English. I didn't need complicated legal language. I just wanted common sense. "You can remarry," Nathan said, "and you can still make sure Susan's wishes are honored." He sketched a few notes onto a legal pad. "The retirement accounts already list Emily as beneficiary." I nodded. "The education fund for Noah and Sophie stays exactly as it is." Another check mark. "The house is the only thing we should think carefully about. I don't want Margaret worrying about where she'll live if something happens to me. And I don't imagine you want Emily worrying that the house disappears forever." "Exactly." Nathan smiled. "Then we'll make sure neither of them has to worry." His recommendation was surprisingly simple. Margaret would sign a prenuptial agreement. If I died first, she'd have the right to continue living in the house for as long as she chose. She couldn't sell it. She couldn't leave it to anyone else. When she eventually passed away or moved out, ownership would go directly to a family trust for Emily and the grandchildren. Nobody lost. Nobody got pushed aside. Everybody knew exactly where they stood. I stared at the papers. "That seems fair." "It is." "And if Emily still isn't happy?" Nathan shrugged gently. "Then this was never about fairness." That sentence stayed with me. Before I left, Nathan cleared his throat. "There is one more thing." His expression had changed. More cautious. "What?" "Have you ever talked with Emily about giving her financial power of attorney?" "No." "Or asked her to help manage your accounts?" "Never." Nathan opened a folder on his desk. "I'm only bringing this up because it directly involves you." He slid a printed email across the desk. The sender was Emily. The date was 3 weeks earlier. The subject line read, **** questions regarding my father's future, planning ****. My stomach tightened. The email wasn't asking Nathan to hand over anything confidential. It was asking whether his office handled consultations involving aging parents who might soon need assistance making financial decisions. Emily had also asked whether adult children usually arrange competency evaluations before or after seeking financial authority. Nathan looked at me carefully. I didn't answer beyond telling her she would need to speak directly with her father. I kept reading. She had described me as healthy, independent, still driving, still managing my finances. But then she'd added one sentence. "I'm concerned he may become vulnerable if someone new enters his life. ****. I slowly placed the paper back onto Nathan's desk. I didn't even tell her about Margaret until last week. I noticed that neither of us spoke. I wasn't angry. Not yet. Mostly, I felt tired. So she was already thinking about this. It appears so. I rubbed my forehead. Nathan spoke quietly. David. Yeah? Planning for aging parents isn't unusual. I know. But trying to remove their independence before there's any sign they need help. He let the sentence finish itself. On my drive home, I stopped at a small diner outside Zionsville. The waitress refilled my coffee twice. I barely noticed. For the first time in my life, I wondered whether I'd confused being needed with being loved. When Emily was little, she needed me because she couldn't survive without me. Somewhere over the years, maybe both of us forgot children are supposed to stop needing their parents that way. That evening, I drove to Margaret's house. She opened the door wearing an old University of Indiana sweatshirt and holding a wooden spoon. I made chili. I need to ask you something. She stepped aside. Inside, the kitchen smelled like onions and cornbread. I told her everything Nathan had shown me. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, I expected anger. Instead, she asked, "How are you holding up?" I laughed softly. I think that's the first time anybody's asked me that. She poured us each a bowl of chili. After dinner, we sat on her back porch beneath a faded porch light. "I've been thinking," I said. "That's usually dangerous." "It is." I smiled for the first time all day. "What if this is my fault?" She frowned. "What if I spent so many years putting Emily first that she honestly believes my life belongs to her?" Margaret looked toward the backyard, then back at me. "David," she spoke carefully, "parents spend years teaching children they're safe." I nodded. "But nobody teaches parents how to let grown children be disappointed." I looked at her. She continued, "You aren't choosing between your daughter and me." "It feels that way." "No." She gently reached over and covered my hand. "You're choosing whether fear gets to make another decision for you." The following Monday, Nathan called. "The documents are ready." I signed everything. The trust. The updated will. The prenuptial agreement Margaret had already reviewed and accepted without changing a single sentence. When we finished, Nathan handed me one final envelope. Wedding invitations came back from the printer. I smiled. "Perfect." Margaret and I mailed them ourselves that afternoon. A week later, one envelope appeared in my mailbox. Mine. Across the front, in thick red marker, someone had written, ****, return to sender. ****. I didn't need to open it. I already knew whose handwriting it was. Inside was the invitation I'd mailed to Emily. Folded once, nothing else. No note, no explanation. Just a silent answer. I stood there in the driveway holding that invitation while the late afternoon sun slipped behind the trees. For the first time, I realized my daughter wasn't trying to stop a wedding. She was trying to make sure I never had another life beyond hers. And for the first time, I wasn't sure I could let her. The morning of the wedding, I woke up at 4:47. I know the exact time because I stared at the red numbers on my alarm clock for nearly 10 minutes before admitting I wasn't going back to sleep. Margaret and I had chosen a Saturday in late April. The ceremony was being held at a small event hall near Geist Reservoir. Nothing fancy. White chairs, simple flowers. Dinner afterward in the same room. Margaret had said she wanted a wedding where people could hear one another talk. At our age, that felt like a reasonable standard. I made coffee and stood at the kitchen window while the sky turned from black to gray. Susan's rose bushes were just beginning to leaf out along the fence. My phone sat face down on the counter. Emily had not called. I told myself I was prepared for that. I wasn't. Around 7, Margaret called. "Are you awake?" "I've been awake since the Eisenhower administration." She laughed. "Good, I was worried you'd oversleep." "I haven't overslept since 1989. "David?" Her voice softened. "Are you all right?" I looked out at the yard. "No." She waited. "But I'm still coming." That's all I needed to hear. By 11, the event hall was filling up. I had expected maybe 40 people. There were nearly 90. Men I had worked with at UPS for decades came in wearing jackets that didn't quite fit anymore. One of them, Carl Jenkins, still had his old brown delivery cap tucked under his arm. "You clean up pretty good," he said. "So do you." He looked down at his shoes. "These are orthopedic." Grace arrived carrying a bakery box and immediately took charge of the guest book, even though nobody had asked her to. 3 women from the literacy program brought homemade lemon bars. Margaret's former teachers formed a line near the coffee station and argued over whether the cream should be refrigerated. The room felt warm, familiar. For most of my life, I'd thought of family as one narrow branch. That morning, I looked around and realized I had been growing roots in other places too. Still, every time the entrance doors opened, I looked up. At 12:15, Nathan found me near the side hallway. You ready? As I'll ever be. He adjusted my tie. It was crooked. Any word from Emily? No. Nathan nodded once. He didn't offer false comfort. I appreciated that. The ceremony was scheduled for 12:30. At 12:23, the doors opened again. Emily walked in. Brandon was beside her. She wore a navy dress and carried a white folder against her chest. For one foolish second, hope rose in me so quickly it almost hurt. Then I saw her face. She wasn't there to celebrate. Margaret was standing near the front of the room talking with Grace. She noticed Emily at the same moment I did. Our eyes met. Margaret didn't move toward me. She trusted me to handle my own daughter. Emily crossed the room quickly. Dad, we need to talk. We can talk after the ceremony. No now. Brandon looked around at the guests. We should probably do this somewhere private. That was the first sensible thing he'd said in weeks. I led them into a small conference room off the hallway. Nathan followed. Margaret started to stay behind, but Emily pointed at her. She needs to hear this too. Margaret came in and closed the door. Emily placed the white folder on the table. I had an attorney review the situation. What situation? I asked. Your marriage. My marriage isn't a legal emergency. It could become one. She opened the folder and pushed a document toward me. It was a proposed agreement, not a prenup. Something else. Emily wanted me to delay the wedding for 90 days, complete a full competency evaluation, and give her temporary authority to review my accounts, property records, and beneficiary designations. I read the first page twice. Then I looked at Brandon. Did you write this? Our attorney did, he said. On what basis? Emily folded her arms. On the basis that you're making a major financial decision under emotional pressure. Margaret went very still. I felt something in me settle. Not explode. Settle. Emotional pressure from whom? Emily glanced at Margaret. Do I really have to say it? Margaret spoke before I could. I signed a prenuptial agreement. Emily blinked. What? I signed it 2 weeks ago. Brandon's eyes moved toward Nathan. Nathan said calmly, the agreement confirms that Margaret has no claim to David's retirement accounts, investment accounts, or inherited family property. Emily stared at me. You already did all this? Yes. Without telling me? You're my daughter, not my financial supervisor. Her face flushed. Brandon picked up the document Nathan had brought and scanned the first page. What about the house? If I die first, I said, Margaret can live there. She can't sell it. She can't leave it to anyone. When she moves out or passes away, it goes into trust for the family. Brandon looked disappointed before he could hide it. It lasted less than a second. But I saw it. So did Emily. She turned toward him. You said she could take everything. I said she might. No, Margaret said quietly. You said what would frighten her. Brandon's jaw tightened. This isn't about me. It became about you when you started discussing my property before I was even engaged, I said. Emily looked back at me. We were trying to protect you. By asking a court to question whether I can make my own decisions? We never filed anything. You were preparing to. She opened her mouth, then closed it. Outside the room, I could hear guests talking. A chair scraped across the floor. Someone laughed near the coffee table. My wedding was waiting 10 feet away. I looked at my daughter. I loved you through every bad grade, every slammed door, every mistake, and every season when you didn't know who you were yet. Her eyes filled, but I kept going. I did not raise you so you could decide when my life was over. Dad, you threatened me with my grandchildren. You told people I wasn't thinking clearly. And now you've brought papers to my wedding because you still believe your fear matters more than my freedom. Emily lowered her voice. I'm scared of losing you. Then you should have loved me better. The room went silent. That sentence hurt me too. Maybe more than it hurt her. I pushed the proposed agreement back across the table. I won't sign this. Emily stared at it. Then at Margaret. Then at me. If you walk out there and marry her, things won't go back to normal. I know. My hands were trembling, so I slid them into my pockets. But normal wasn't working. Brandon reached for Emily's arm. We should go. She pulled away from him. For a moment, I thought she might stay. Instead, she picked up the folder and walked out of the room without another word. Brandon followed. Through the open doorway, I watched them cross the hall while nearly 90 guests pretended not to stare. Emily paused near the main entrance. She looked back at me. I didn't chase her. A minute later, the doors closed behind them. Margaret stepped beside me. We can postpone, she whispered. I looked toward the front of the room. At Grace. At Carl in his orthopedic shoes. At the empty chair I had reserved for Susan's memory. Then I looked at the woman beside me. No, I said, I've postponed enough. 20 minutes later, I stood before our friends and promised Margaret the years I still had left. My voice cracked once. She squeezed my hand. When the officiant pronounced us husband and wife, the room rose in applause. And for the first time that day, I stopped looking toward the door. Married life didn't begin with fireworks. It began with quiet. The Monday after the wedding, Margaret and I sat on our back porch drinking coffee while a pair of robins argued over worms in the yard. She looked at me over the rim of her mug. How are you really doing? I thought about lying. Instead, I answered honestly. I miss my daughter. Margaret reached across the little table and rested her hand over mine. You can miss her. She smiled gently. Without regretting marrying me. She was right. The two feelings lived side by side. One didn't cancel out the other. For the next several weeks, I heard nothing from Emily. No calls. No texts. No photos of Noah's baseball games or Sophie's piano lessons. Wednesday afternoons, the time I'd always picked up the kids from school, became strangely empty. I'd find myself glancing at the clock around 3 o'clock before remembering there was nowhere I needed to be. Margaret never tried to fill that silence. Sometimes the kindest thing another person can do is simply sit beside you while it hurts. About a month after the wedding, Nathan called. I thought you'd want to know something. What happened? I ran into Brandon. How's he doing? Nathan laughed once. Concerned. About what? He scheduled an appointment asking whether the trust could be challenged. I wasn't surprised. What did you tell him? The same thing I'd tell anyone. Nathan paused. It was your decision. He kept insisting you must have influenced me. I didn't. I know. The documents were prepared exactly as you instructed. Thank you. There was one more thing. What? He seemed much more interested in the trust than in your marriage. After we hung up, I didn't tell Margaret right away. Not because I wanted to hide it, because part of me still hoped Brandon would eventually prove me wrong. A few days later, Grace called. I saw Emily. How is she? Tired. Grace hesitated. I probably shouldn't tell you this. Tell me anyway. She and Brandon were arguing in the grocery store parking lot. I stayed quiet. She kept asking why he'd pushed so hard about your estate. What did he say? I couldn't hear everything. Grace sighed. But I did hear him say, she looked at me through the phone somehow. None of this would have happened if your father had just listened. That sentence lingered with me all evening. Not because of Brandon, because Emily had listened to him instead of me. 2 weeks later, my phone rang just after dinner. Emily. I stared at the screen until Margaret quietly nodded. You should answer. I did. Hello? For several seconds, all I heard was breathing. Then, Dad? Her voice cracked. Can we talk? Of course. Not over the phone. She came the following afternoon. Alone. No Brandon. No children. She stood on my front porch holding nothing except her purse. She looked smaller somehow. Older. I opened the door. She tried to speak. Instead, she started crying. Real crying. The kind that makes conversation impossible. I stepped aside. Come in. We sat in the living room where she'd opened Christmas presents as a little girl. Neither of us seemed to know how to begin. Finally, Emily looked around the room. You didn't change anything. I wasn't trying to erase your mother. Fresh tears rolled down her face. I know that now. She wiped them away. I've been angry for so long that I forgot grief and anger aren't the same thing. I listened. She took a shaky breath. When you said you were getting married, I felt like I was losing Mom all over again. I nodded slowly. I understand. No. She shook her head. You understand the part that isn't ugly. She looked down at her hands. The ugly part is that Brandon kept talking about the house, the savings. What could happen if you changed everything? She swallowed hard. I let those conversations become my own. I waited. He didn't put those words in my mouth. She looked directly at me. I did. Those 6 words mattered more than any apology. Because they were honest. I'm sorry, Dad. Silence settled between us. Finally, she whispered, I don't expect you to forgive me today. I don't. She nodded. I figured. I leaned forward. But I also don't intend to spend the rest of my life being angry. Emily covered her face with both hands. I don't deserve another chance. Maybe not. She looked up. But Noah and Sophie deserve to know their grandfather. She began crying again. I'll never use them against you again. I need that to be true. It will be. I believe she meant it. That didn't mean trust magically returned. Trust doesn't grow back overnight. It grows the same way gardens do. A little at a time. Before Emily left, she hesitated by the front door. Brandon moved into his brother's condo. I looked at her. We're taking some time apart. I didn't celebrate. I didn't criticize. That marriage belonged to them. Not me. Summer arrived. Little by little, Wednesday afternoons returned. The first time Noah walked back into my garage, he pointed at my old tackle box. Grandpa, you finally going to teach me how to fish? I thought you'd never ask. Sophie hugged Margaret before she hugged me. Hi, Miss Margaret. Margaret smiled. Hi, sweetheart. She never asked them to call her Grandma. She never tried to become another Susan. She simply became herself. And somehow that was enough. One cool September morning, Margaret and I worked together in the backyard. Susan's roses were blooming again. Margaret planted lavender along the back fence. She looked at me. You think Susan would have liked it? I smiled. I think she'd have told you the spacing was uneven. Margaret laughed. So she and I would have gotten along. I think you would have. We stood there quietly for a while. The roses belonged to Susan. The lavender belonged to Margaret. Neither replaced the other. They simply grew in the same garden. That afternoon, I drove to the cemetery alone. I brought fresh flowers, brushed a few fallen leaves from Susan's headstone, and sat on the grass for a long time. I kept my promise, I said softly. I took care of Emily. A breeze moved through the trees. And finally, I smiled. I took care of myself too. On the drive home, I realized something that had taken me 24 years to learn. Growing older doesn't mean your life is over. It simply means you're finally old enough to know the difference between love and guilt. If this story reminds you that setting boundaries doesn't mean loving someone less, I hope you'll hold on to that thought. And if you've ever had to choose between keeping the peace and respecting yourself, you're not alone.